Running Sentences presents The Lost Adventures of a Maybe Hero. Part 3. Introduction of a Hero. With little to nothing set in stone, Leonardo finds himself dragged into the world of heroes, all while trying to save the day, or at least figure out how to save the day. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and incidences within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, living, dead, real businesses, events, situations, jobs, and so on, is purely coincidental, along with any fictional resemblance. Copyright 2022, Michael Honnery. All rights reserved. Catalina left Leonardo in a back alleyway with some instructions that in 20 minutes he was to come strolling out onto the sidewalk in his costume and to go into Herb's Deli. His first problem was that he hadn't had a chance to remove the costume, nor get to the zipper in the back. So why had she said get into his costume? He didn't know. He shook his head as the second issue raised its ugly head. Had 20 minutes gone by? He did not have a watch, or any way to tell time, so the thought of going out and asking someone on the sidewalk seemed appealing, but he did not like that idea. For one thing, if 20 minutes had gone by, to the people who were just passing by would result in lots of weird looks, since he didn't know when 20 minutes ago was. And especially because he was walking around in, for what all appearances was a wetsuit that gave some sort of appearance of being made into a dapper, well-dressed suit. He gave up after another minute or so of waiting and walked out onto the sidewalk. The second he did, he earned stares and lots of looks from the people around. One person even grabbed up their cell phone and took what appeared to be a photo, but it may have been a video, and Leonardo was not waiting around. He wasn't sure if that made things worse or better, or just what it was going to do, but he just turned and tried to hide his embarrassment and went up to the front door of this deli, which had plenty of tables out front and a few people enjoying sandwiches out here, although with him coming around the corner walking up to the front of the store, they too seemed to take notice, and there was a few cell phones coming out, so he quickened his pace to hide from the stares and everything as he headed straight for the store. The automatic doors whooshed open, and he hurried into the place. It was not just a deli counter that occupied this store, but it was more or less a little shop that had grown out to meet the demands of the people. Thus, there were rows of goods in the aisles, and the deli counter itself had been pushed further and further back into the store as it became a convenience store almost. He would have to seek out this deli counter and declare upon getting there that he, the masked butler, was there for rye rum ham. Why those specific words, Catalina hadn't told him. But she had specified those specific words, and now all he could do was head down the aisle trying to hide from all of these looking eyes who were very curious about why a man was walking around in a wetsuit. The aisle now past him, Leonardo found himself in the back of this place, or well, as far back as the customers could go. Here it was clear, except for a few standalone freezers and then a few drink fridges along the wall to his right. And to his left, the deli. He found his stomach going a bit wobbly about the uncertainty of all this. Catalina had said that the deli people were her friends and they would just hand over the note. But he took a few more steps forward, trying to hold his head up high, scared, nervous, and just unsure of himself. The deli people behind the counter, which he counted about 3 of them, all stared at him. "What you need?" You need food, mister? We only serve paying customers. Though the whole get-up you're in is making me think you might need more than food." I was saying... Yeah, we were all sent by God or something, or some other creature to live on this planet. It ain't been great so far. Take it easy. He's just a kid in a costume. We don't need to scare customers. The second deli worker who had said this came over and leaned against the glass container that showed off the meats and cheeses inside. This one shooed away his co-worker, who had been a bit yappy at Leonardo, before turning back to the young man. "So what will it be, kid?" "I am the masked butler seeking rye, rum, ham." The words had sputtered out, and he wasn't even sure he had said them loudly. His voice seemingly lost in itself, and he wondered if he had to repeat himself. "What's that, kiddo?" I'm seeking rye, rum, ham because I'm the masked butler. A certain woman sent me." The worker stepped away from the counter and folded his arms with a wiry grin on his face. "Do you know, that's quite a special order." Yes, I do in fact want that." "All right, but it will take a few seconds to get it ready for you." Leonardo could only nod as the deli worker disappeared towards the back of the store. He stood there and waited while this deli worker to come back with his order, hopefully. And eventually the man did come back. "I got here a piece of white paper that says rye rum ham on it, dropped off by someone anonymous out back. I gotta ask, though, how you knew it was there and what you want it for." There were many thoughts crashing through Leonardo's mind at this second, and many of them, suddenly as they'd been there, were now gone, leaving him with not a single thought to sputter out. He blinked and tried to think. "I was told that some criminal element was leaving clues to crimes and that they were preparing to commit or something, and they're challenging anybody to try and come stop them. I found out about it and intend to stop them. Now, if you're trying to stop me from stopping crimes..." Leonardo had no idea where any of this was coming from, and that it was just coming out of his mouth, sputteringly. He was trying to think, but his mouth had moved all on its own volition. Well, he had to go with it now, not that he was even sure of what he'd said or what was coming out of his mouth. All right, calm your britches. Take the damn piece of paper, I don't want it." The worker held it over to the counter, and Leonardo went over and snatched it up. And though once he had it, he took a few steps back and found himself unsure of what to do after that. He turned and headed for the front door of this establishment. It didn't take long to get to the front of Herb's Deli, but he noticed that there were now a couple of people following him down the aisles, and with cameras. He'd taken a few peeks backwards when he'd heard footsteps behind him, and there were a few curious faces there, and they were all staring at him. Leonardo hurried up. They followed. He made it to the door and slowed down there, swung around to face the group. "There are criminals in the fair city?" "Yes, and they're up to something and I shall stop them with this clue." "Are you a superhero?" Leonardo looked down at a kid who was decked out in superhero pajamas and looked to be about 6 years old, maybe. Though since he didn't really know how old kids were supposed to look, it was all just a guess. Yes, that's, I am going to have to analyze this and, save the day, I guess?" "Why don't you just report it to the cops?" That's because, it's because how often do you hear the police stopping a crime before it happens? They will show up after the fact, but not before. I'm going to put a stop to this before the incident and before the police even know that something is wrong. So take that." The crowd was still curious and pushed to get even closer. Even though he only counted about 5 people, it still was more than enough to begin feeling crowded, and a security guard for the deli had suddenly appeared nearby and was making his way towards them. Leonardo decided he was not going to wait around and stepped towards the automatic door, which swished open again, allowing him out. A step out into the open air gave Leonardo only a moment to breathe. The people were still following him, and he didn't want that. It felt creepy. They were staring and questioning things, and it was all flying over his head, and it made him feel like they were going to grab at him and rip him apart so that they could have souvenirs before any crime could be stopped. His feet took but a second to begin running for the alleyway that Catalina had dumped him off in with these instructions. He now worried, though, that he didn't have any further instructions about what to do. The alleyway greeted him with its emptiness as he rushed into it. Leonardo looked about and around desperately for Catalina or a way out of this mess. The people were still following, and he decided not to look any further backwards to see if anyone was chasing him, as this would only increase his fear of something happening to him by those weird people, although he could hear their footsteps. The far end of the alleyway greeted another street was coming up on him as he just rushed through this alleyway, and he knew he'd soon have to make a choice about what to do. He came to a skittering stop at this sidewalk and glanced about, hoping for some sign of hope. It was quiet and normal. The life of the city was going on as if the mad thing that was happening with him was not actually happening other than to him. "We need to see what your note says." The confirmation that the people were still behind him was enough to get him to turn and head towards his right. No time to think, no time for anything other than running. This run down the sidewalk was going about as well as Leonardo had hoped. He was puffing along, and so were the people behind him. There was a new problem ahead of him, and that lay in the form of an intersection of a four-way road. He was still a little bit away from it, and the green man allowing people to cross the crosswalk had illuminated, but was counting down the last few seconds. There was no way he would arrive in time to cross, and while crossing a crosswalk that wasn't safe didn't feel very heroic. His stomach lurched at the thought of being caught, and the piece of paper ripped from his hands before he even knew what it said. Still, he had to stop, and so Leonardo slowed and then came to a stop at the crosslight, which now glowed red. He spun about, holding up his hand to stop his new followers. "As the masked butler, I am telling you all to halt your chase for a few minutes. It will give us a second to collect our breaths, and also it would reflect badly on me if I ran across the street now that I'm here. So, stop!" He now had 6 people, when he swore he had been 5 people before, who all nodded their heads. They took this minute to collect themselves, as he looked over at the crossing light. It did not look like it wanted to turn at any point, so just to be safe, he pressed the crossing button, but it felt broken, so he waited and hoped. Finally, after a minute, it changed to the little green man crossing, and he sprinted across, hoping his followers hadn't seen it change. The chase was on again. He'd gotten a bit further down towards this next sidewalk, keeping a decent pace as a car pulled up beside him. The vehicle kept pace with him easily, and the back door was thrown open. Fearing that something was about to happen, Leonardo tried to move away, but a person jumped out of the car, grabbed him, pushed him into the back seat, and then jumped back in themselves. Leonardo tried to escape, but his arm was grasped on one side, and then the person who'd thrown him in had grabbed at his other. "Hey, let me go, I'm a hero." The woman up front, driving the car, swung about in a full mask. Her eyes sparkled from behind it as she looked over at him. Oh my, we've caught ourselves a hero trying to stop our plan. Did you throw the leaflets out, dear worker?" There was a nod from the man who had pushed him into the car, and then this lady up front simply turned around and faced forward again. He felt unable to fight against those that held him there as this car suddenly jerked to life, and they sped off down the road. The vehicle zigged and zagged its way through some road, and eventually came into a parking garage. Here it circled round and round until it came to a downward ramp that was pitched in darkness. The sight of it made Leonardo snap to, as his mind figured out that it was Catalina likely in the front seat, and that he just had not realized it at all. He sat up as the car went down the ramp. Feeling a little bit securer in his knowledge, Leonardo did not complain when they tugged him out of the car and then into their little hideaway. The masks all came off and were firmly set aside. Once they were all firmly and safely inside, Catalina came up to him with a triumphant grin on her face, like she'd done something great. but as far as he could tell, she hadn't done much at all. That was fun. She grabbed the piece of paper from his hand and held it up. You didn't open up your hint. It would allow you to know our dastardly secretly plan. Yeah, I didn't have time. I spent most of my time running away after I got it. I didn't have time because people wanted to know about me. She opened it up to reveal a blank page and grinned even further. I was looking forward to seeing what you'd do when you saw this, but your reaction was just as good. We caught it all on video, by the way. What? You caught it on video? Video's uploaded onto the net and already released, boss. The local paper and news station have been tipped off as well. Now it's only a matter of time of sitting back and waiting for the clock to strike 12. Leonardo looked about desperately, trying to get a handle on the situation, but it was not computing with him. Had they hidden in the back of the crowd at the deli and recorded the whole affair, and now they were releasing it? Well, it made sense, but why him? I say we all split up. The cops will be looking for the weirdness now that we've pulled our old stunt trick again. Laura and Roscoe nodded to this and had already begun collecting their stuff before heading out the door. This left Catalina still standing there, grinning and idly tossing the paper to the side. We should go back to your place, though I should also burn the fake note, just to be on the safe side. Catalina, you released a video with me in costume. Can you explain why? Of course, we need the world to know that you exist, so that when we pop up it all looks real. I thought you figured that out. He felt lost again, as words failed him, and so did his mind. It all made sense, but this was also causing a massive roadblock in his mind. How could he have not seen something so simple? Catalina had already picked up the note and then came over, grabbing his arms. Come on, Lost Soul. You have some more workouts to do, I think, and you need to get your mind in the right place before all of this goes off. Also, take off the suit. She reached over and grabbed the mask, which, after a bit of tugging, finally came off. Catalina had hurriedly helped him out of his wetsuit costume and found some clothes for him that were in the hideout, and he quickly got dressed. The sticky sweat from the suit managed to stick around, and he was clammy, uncomfortable, and simply uncomfortable. The two had gone to her car, and he went into the back to sit down and lay down to relax a little bit. The sticky sweat had come through in some bits and bobs of the clothes, and it just was not very comfortable. She had turned on the AC on full blast to help him as she drove in her usual sporadic fashion to get them places. But it was never a nice ride when she drove in such a way. I do hope your father came up with a better costume in our absence, or can do so before your plan, happens. Oh, why? I feel like I'm a soaking wet animal that in a lake that fell into a lake or a pool or then got trapped somehow and only managed to escape barely or something like that. The costume will not do if I'm to fight, as I can't really move well and it makes me ish. Oh well, we will figure something out. We have some time. We just need to let things cool down a bit. Dad will come up with something, I'm sure. She kept the car jinking and sliding about between other vehicles as they headed for home. The sun had already begun to dip by the time they pulled into the driveway leading up to Leonardo's home. Catalina was even kind enough to drive up close to the door as the driveway would allow to the front door. He got out and grabbed the suit, dragging it out of the car and up the little walkway to the front door, and went right up to it and opened it, but not happily. His dragging of the suit came to a stop in the kitchen, where Jeeves was busily working away, making some food, or something. His butler looked up as Leonardo tossed the suit into the center of the room. It won't do, Jeeves. Sir? Your costume is too heavy, it makes me sweat heavily, and I can't move well in it, aside from running away, which that seems to work kind of well. I cannot save the day in it." "Ah, I see. Well, I will see what I can do for you as soon as I have finished making you dinner. It will be ready shortly, if you'll take a seat at the kitchen table, sir." His butler signaled that he should go sit over by the table, which Leonardo did with ease, though he sat down heavily on the chair, the feeling of exhaustion running over him. His mind realized that he'd been doing a lot and was running purely on adrenaline, and this made much of what had happened a hazy, foggy mess to think about. He shook his head for a second, and then put it down on the table to help him think, as it was cool, and the hard wood greeted his forehead nicely. He sighed, closed his eyes, and accidentally decided to fall asleep for a second. "Sir," Leonardo jerked his head back up, blinking, and wondered what had happened. He looked over at Jeeves, who was placing a plate on a placemat onto the table. "I would appreciate it, sir, if you did not sleep at the table. It is bad manners, and I've taught you not to have such things." Leonardo was still blinking and trying to think. Had he fallen asleep? How long had he potentially fallen asleep? The smell of food caused him to look down at the chicken parma on the plate in front of him. His stomach grumbled, and as Jeeves placed a knife and fork in front of him, Leonardo quickly lost the thought of if he'd been asleep or not, or for how long it had been, no matter if it was 1 iota or more. Famished, the food went quickly, and only left a minor burp at the end of it as he sat back. Jeeves was buzzing about the kitchen, cleaning up what needed to be cleaned, which was not much, since he always kept things all too clean. "Jeeves, you will fix the suit, right?" "Yes, sir. I will as soon as I can. Is there anything specific that was a problem?" "I told you, Jeeves. It's big, bulky, and I can't move in it. Plus it makes me sweat. Also, when in it, I think the only thing I'm capable of doing is sweating. I don't think you want a masked butler to be known as the masked, sweaty man who is dressed as a butler." Jeeves shook his head no, furiously. It was settled. Neither wanted butlers to look bad or feel bad, so to the rework it would go. Jeeves already had a far-off look, as he was busy thinking things through about how to improve it. Leonardo got up from the table, still tired and wanting to get away from it all for a few minutes. Using this as an excuse, he made his way out of the kitchen. The second he got into his own bedroom, he went over and flopped onto the bed, and woke right up. A feeling of having not done something bothered him. Eventually, getting enough energy, he got up off of the bed and went over to his computer. Had that video really been uploaded? It seemed like the criminals had been serious about that, but maybe it was just a prank. His finger hovered over the power button to the tower before pressing it. His heart started to race as the computer came to life. Curiosity was a very dangerous thing, but he could not stop himself. With the PC now fully operational, his hand moved of its own volition, getting an internet browser opened, and already typing into the search bar for masked butler. A second later, a few uncensored news stories popped to the top of his search, followed by more search results. There was an image of himself standing in a costume, well, it was obviously a wetsuit, made to look like a suit, as the main picture. He did not like the look, and clicking on the website instantly made it not connect. Leonardo was frustrated and flinched, as the image was all he could really see. "Well, this looks bad. It even says that the cops are looking into a suspect called the Masked Butler for disturbing the peace. They're wanted for questioning as to why he decided to make a spectacle of something." That was the most he got out of the little brief blurb that was next to the website about the news. The mouse scroll wheel was being turned furiously as Leonardo tried to find more and more of what was going on, but there was no real other stories, and all of the links that he clicked instantly led to dead ends. So the only thing that he could find was that the police were searching for a man called the Masked Butler, but not for the criminals that he'd told them about. Leonardo shook his head. This had all gone very wrong, and the sudden knocking on glass coming from the window made him jump and swirled about with wild eyes. "Who's there?" He glanced about his room, looking for the sound and, of course, towards the window, but could see nothing out of the ordinary. Then the tap, tap, tap came from his window, and he jumped up from his chair, as a hand seemed to be waving at him from it. At first, Leonardo backed away from the hand, his mind questioning why it was there and if it had come to kill him. But since it was by the window and not managing to get it open, he figured it was somewhat safe to go near. Leonardo made his way over, and the closer he got, the more he could see that there was an arm and a body attached to said hand. That was a good thing, since a hand on its own would definitely be a killer thing to have to deal with. The face that looked up from him hanging from the terrace side of the house was Catalina's. He took a step back, wondering why she had chosen to climb up the wall instead of just coming in through the front door and knocking on his door. "Let me in!" Her voice caught him off guard in its muffledness, and he hurried forward to open the window. Then, as quickly as he'd gotten there, he hurried to the side so that he could let her claw her way in. Catalina's hands were already grasping at the interior wall as she pulled herself in by the time he'd stepped out of the way. And finally, semi-exhausted, she plopped her way in, and seemed rather wet from all the rain that was following her in. So Leonardo snapped the window shut once she was safely in. "What are you doing?" "Coming in for a visit. I wanted to see if you'd seen the news." He turned to her to see that she was already on her feet and going over towards his computer, with a small wet squelch coming from her clothes as she sat down. He flinched and headed towards a closet where he knew a towel, or 4, were tucked away. "Yes, I saw the news. It isn't good. The police are now looking for me." "Au contraire, sir. They're now looking for the masked butler, not a dork like you." He nearly missed taking a step as her comment hit him, but kept himself on his feet as he approached his closet, and then pulled out the 4 towels and turned towards her. "I take offense to that. And how many places around here do you think hire butlers? I'm going to guess in a modern society that is very few, and that the police are going to wind up here soon." He walked over and dumped the towels on the top of her head and went back towards his bed, where he sat down rather heavily. "So what if they'll come talk to you and my dad? They'll soon see that my hawkish-looking father with his weird frame doesn't fit their description. No big deal. And that has an added benefit." "And what is that?" "They aren't looking for my gang." She grabbed a towel from the pile on top of her head, and it sat all around her, having not stayed on her head, and wiped the water away from her face. "That doesn't mean they aren't looking for your gang." "It does too. I've been inside the local police station, and I know how many detectives they have working on things. This town has but a few cops, since it isn't big. The more things that get reported, the easier it is for stuff to slip through the cracks." "I do not like the sound of that one bit." She stood up, shrugging. "Well, if you're going to escape as the masked butler when we pull off our little heist, then you're going to need to find a way to keep the cops busy. Otherwise, they will come and find you." He got up from his bed to protest, but she was out the door. Leonardo fell back onto his bed, suddenly feeling very tired again, and he gave up on trying to think about all of this and clambered under the sheets to go to bed. Yawning and exhausted, the next morning Leonardo had made his way down towards the front door of the house. Not because he wanted to be down here, but because there was a rather insistent knocking and ringing of the bell coming from it. He wondered where Jeeves was and why his butler had not answered the door, but since he was here now, Leonardo was going to deal with it. He pushed aside a curtain of the window that was next to the door that gave him a peek to the outside. It revealed 2 men in suits. Leonardo stepped back and collected his thoughts. Cops? It was possible, and Catalina had said that they would find their way here. The doorbell rang again, and he stepped forward to open the door, if only to stop the noise. "Hello, I'm not here to listen to any speeches about religion or how God has saved you, so goodbye." He moved to close the door, but a heavy arm of one of the men blocked it from fully closing.
Excuse me, sir. We're Detectives O'Ryan and Hank. We have reports that there is a butler working at this house.
Yes, so what?
Did you not see the news the other day, sir? I'm cut off from much of the world. I don't get to go out much until recently lately, so no, there is no news that I know of. Leonardo's glance went back and forth between the two men, trying to see if the two detectives were buying what he said. The two men had poker faces, which did not give him much hope. That only answers one part of our questions, sir. You asked me if I heard of the news, not if I had a butler working here. You detectives stated you heard a butler was working here. You're playing with semantic words, Mac.
Yes, and? The detective, who called himself Orion, shook his head.
Fine. Do you have a butler working here, sir?
Yes, Jeeves, but I don't know where he is at present.
Of course you don't. Where does he live?
Here at the house, mostly.
Can we speak to him? We have a few questions about an incident that happened yesterday. If we could just come inside and...
Leonardo shook his head no.
I will see if I can find him, but you two get to wait out there. I've read enough comic books to know that you can't come in without a warrant.
With that said, he pushed the door closed, though it took some strength since the police officer was still leaning against it. But he managed to get it closed, because the officer let up, probably, and when it did close, he spun on his feet and looked about. Where was Jeeves? In a mad dash, Leonardo hurried towards the kitchen and stopped. Jeeves was not there, which would leave the likely space being the basement as a hiding spot. But what was he to do if the man wasn't there? Could he tell the police that, and that they'd just go away, maybe? Or would they say they'd call again another day? His mind rummaged for a solution as he went towards the basement door, heart thumping, and hoping that Jeeves was down there to sort this matter out. Though the thought also struck him that he had no idea what Jeeves was going to say to the police either, and that might be bad. There was no sound coming from down in the workshop that Jeeves called his little space. Leonardo had bounded down the steps, listening carefully as he went. He came to an end of the stairs and turned the corner to find an empty workshop. Leonardo's stomach dropped as he tried to figure out where Jeeves might be. But no answer came to him. The man was always either in the kitchen or down here or following him around, trying to make sure that he didn't do anything. But he also couldn't leave the cops waiting around at the front door, as they might have called in someone to go get a warrant of some sort. Leonardo grabbed for the railing to the stairs to balance himself as he turned around and began climbing as fast as he could back up, and then stopped once more to look around. Maybe Jeeves was here? Jeeves, are you here? He waited to see if a muffled moan or cry for help would come up from a fallen butler. There was nothing, and he slowly made his way up, just in case a sudden cry for help were to come out of nowhere. Back up on the main floor of the house, Leonardo rushed from the kitchen towards the living room with hopes of finding Jeeves. His butler did not pop up, and the only place left to look was upstairs. But to do that, he would have to pass the front door. He was sure that the cops heard his clomping about and would hear him head right past the door. Hell, they'd probably use his running past the front door and clomping about as an excuse that something was going on and charge in under suspicious circumstances. That wouldn't do. He went up to the front door and yanked it open. The two cops looked over surprised. My search so far of this large house has revealed that he isn't in the basement or on the first floor. I'm going to keep checking on the second floor, if you would be so kind as to keep waiting. He slammed the door shut and spun on his feet again, then flinched. It probably wasn't the greatest thing to do, as to slam the door in front of the cops, but it was a little too late to try and undo that, so he went straight for the stairs and bounded up those. His exhaustive rush brought him up to the second-floor hallway, a little tired and wanting some air, and he took in a few deep breaths to calm himself. and began the process of throwing open the many doors up here as his search continued. There was still no sign of Jeeves, and he was rapidly approaching the end of all of the doors to this second floor. That would only leave the attic floor, and he did not know what he was going to do if the man was not there. What to do then? The question rattled around in his mind, and as he threw open the last door before the door to the attic, to find nothing. Gathering himself, Leonardo turned and headed for the attic door. The flight of stairs up to the third story and attic seemed to be extra long this morning. Leonardo did his best to keep up his pace, as he did not want to keep the detectives downstairs waiting. He clambered up the last few steps and grappled at a nearby wall for the light switch. The lights flickered on, revealing the used room, but no signs of anyone here. The unmade bed, plus clothes lying about, made him suspicious, but he didn't have time to deal with that right now. "Jeeves, are you here?" His voice hit the walls, but did not bounce about the space, instead dying away as he looked around and then turned around. How to explain that a butler who works and lives here isn't here to detectives who probably would not believe him? The trudge back down to the front door took him some time as he ran his mind through a variety of excuses. None seemed particularly good enough to throw out there as to what was going on. And with the front door now right in front of him, it seemed like his imagination had run out of places to run to or to imagine. His hand grasped the door handle and pulled the door open. The two detectives were still out front, waiting calmly for him. "You've come back, and here I had a bet that you would run off to hide somewhere in the house. That's 3 beers and 2 stiff drinks you owe me now, Orion." Yeah. So, kid, where's the butler?" "I don't know. He should be here, but he isn't here." "Well, was he here yesterday?" "As far as I know, yes. I was actually out yesterday experiencing life." "Oh, were you, sir? And where did you go?" "A friend brought me to town to see what it was like there." "Oh, good for you for getting out of your little holed-up world. I'm a bit surprised you didn't run into the hubbub, though." Leonardo did his best to shrug as the detective who called himself Orion pulled out a business card and held it out. Leonardo gently grabbed at it, taking it into his hand. "If you could give that to your man, Butler Jeeves, or whatever you call him. Are all butlers called Jeeves or something? Anyway, tell him that the police, Detectives Orion and Hank, would like to talk to him. It is nothing major, but we just need to have a chat, as my fellow partner Orion said." The two detectives waved goodbye and then began heading off towards their car. No further word was exchanged as he stood there looking between the business card and the cop car. He watched them as they got into their car, got it turned around, and then disappeared off down the driveway. With one last look around, Leonardo was about to close the door when he saw the garage, which was the only place he hadn't searched yet. And maybe Jeeves was in there, maybe not, but at this point it seemed like a good idea to maybe search it. He was unable to resist and marched across the driveway, straight to the side door to the garage, knocking on it. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, or if Catalina or Jeeves was suddenly going to pop up and open the door, but something was going to happen, as nothing but bad things had happened lately, so a string of such luck would have to break at some point, maybe? The door to the garage had swung open upon his rapping at it, which made him feel like things were going from bad to much worse. The interior of the first floor of the garage was dark, and Leonardo felt along the wall closest to the door for a switch. His hand took its time finding it, and between the darkness and the light coming in from the door itself, he was not having much fun finding it. His eyes kept refusing to concentrate with the dichotomy of light and dark playing, until he managed to actually find the switch, and with the lights now on, he turned to see what he could see, after blinking a few times. 4 cars, and nothing out of the ordinary. "Catalina, Jeeves, are you in here?" His voice bounced about the garage a bit before dying away. There was no noise following his declaration and questioning, so he decided maybe upstairs, but they should have heard him up there, should they not? He had to check, though, just in case something had happened to them and they were lying about the place and needed help. He made his way to the stairs leading up and went up them, but slowly, not out of fear that something was wrong, but he was tired from having run all around the house, and when he got to the top of the stairs, he just wanted to take the moment to enjoy being able to breathe normally. When he got to the top of the stairs and to the door, he politely knocked again. Then the waiting began. He let a minute pass, and made sure that that was a minute had passed and he didn't just barge in, and then waited 2 more minutes. He couldn't decide if knocking again was a bad idea or not, or if he should try the door handle. After 5 minutes of waiting, he gave up and opened the door. The living room of the apartment up here was well lit by both a skylight and the interior lights. The area seemed untouched by anything, and no one had come to see who was barging into the place. Leonardo had made a lot of noise, throwing the door open, and he flinched when that door bounced back towards him. "Hiding is not funny. We need to talk. Catalina, Jeeves." His calls once again were going unanswered as he made his way towards what he figured might be a bedroom towards the back. He carefully poked his head around the door into the bedroom, doing so because he was slightly afraid of peeping on something he shouldn't be seeing, like someone having sex, because that would be the only reason one would ignore the hellos and words he'd been saying. There was, however, nothing in here, aside from clothes and a rather unmade bed that looked like it had been abandoned post-haste for something else. He entered slowly, making sure that he still wasn't invading into the room. No one popped out in the nude or in underwear or even dressed, so his fear of the first 2 things happening was abated slightly. It wasn't that he thought such things were bad, but he hadn't really experienced life and real-life situations like that before, so it was a bit odd and off. There were a few comics he'd read, but they somehow would disappear shortly after he'd read them and put them into the library collection. "I've called out a few times, but is anyone here? Please do feel free to answer." He wandered further into the bedroom, not waiting for any answer. None was coming, and he was pretty sure of that, but it felt good to make sure and to say things anyway. His little wanderings took him towards the bed, where he put his hand down on the sheets instinctively. At first he questioned himself why he was doing this, then remembered some comic book he'd read. A detective had felt that a person had just been in the area for a few seconds ago. To try and confirm the theory, they'd touched a chair, feeling for warmth. Leonardo's own hand, which had retracted a second ago, returned to the bed, feeling a cold bedsheet. That confirmed, he moved towards another door that looked to head towards a bathroom, since the door was slightly open, but the light in there was off. He could only catch what little light came in from the windows in the bedroom and filtered over towards it. Having ventured over there, he hit the light switch, and felt like he was hit by a wall of perfume. The bathroom was a bit of a mess of sundries that occupied a woman's bathroom, and most of which he could not put a name to. His elbow bumped into the door as he stepped a bit further in, and this caused a bra that had been thrown atop of the door to fall onto his head and make him jump out of his skin. He batted at it, trying to get it off of his head because he wasn't sure what it was, as he stumbled about and out of the bathroom. When he did get it off the top of his head and into his hands, he realized he was holding a rather racy see-through bra, and his mind pictured Catalina wearing it, and he instantly dropped it. Leonardo took a furious look around, feeling himself blushing in embarrassment of being so inept, and, well, sexy things were not his forte, and his only hope was to flee back to his bedroom and pretend that none of this had happened. With a nod of his head, he did exactly that. It was a perfect plan. There was nothing wrong with that. Emerging from the garage in a rush, he headed for the front door to the house, and only glanced around idly. It was wet and rainy around here again, and it did not make for a good time, so he was hurrying. It did not escape his notice that another car was now pulling up into the driveway, but he was done for the day. It had been too much, and whoever it was, and whoever they were, well, they might as well go away. Leonardo was through the front door in a flash. There was plenty of thoughts running around Leonardo's mind by the time he went up the stairs of his house and headed for his room. Mostly his mind was not on superhero things or where his butler or Catalina were. No, it was still clearly picturing the fabric in his hands that he grabbed off of the top of his head. He tried shaking his head to get the thought out of his mind so he could think about other things, but there it stayed until he got into his bedroom and dove under the covers and hoped his mind would simply stop. It didn't, and he sat there trying to think of anything else. "Sir," Leonardo threw off the cover and looked at Jeeves accusingly. "You? Sir, did I not see you coming out of the garage? Did you have some business in there, sir?" "I was searching for you or Catalina or anyone." "Sir?" With some effort, Leonardo began looking about himself for the business card that the detective had given him. He found it in his pocket and tossed it towards Jeeves. "The police would like to talk to you." "Whatever for, sir?" "They're looking for a butler in connection to the case they have. And, the masked butler situation yesterday." "I see." Leonardo had jumped out of bed and went over towards his butler, who was a little bit taller than him. "Where were you, by the way? Where did you go? I wake up and no one was home, and I ran all around the house and the garage looking for you because the detectives wanted to talk to you. I freaked out worrying and trying to find out, while trying to keep the cops happy." Yes, sir. My apologies for leaving unannounced. I should have left a note for you. You aren't used to me not being here, and I did not think about it. I went to see a friend about some material for your new suit, and, my daughter went along because, she said she wanted to see the place." Sorry, No worries, sir. I did have some other things I needed to do as well." "You are always up to something, Jeeves, but you usually tell me." Leonardo had relaxed a little bit and went back towards his bed. Yes, sir, I suppose I should tell you. I went to see your parents." This froze up Leonardo, whose mind went into overdrive, trying to figure out what had just been said to him. End of part 3. Thank you for listening.